Here's an idea. We're in the midst of an introvert craze. For as long as there have been distinctive groups to look up to, we have been doing exactly that. There has been a time and place for a great many people. In early history, it was the philosopher and the inventor. Variously, it has been the engineer, scientist, and socialite. In America in the 1920s, it was the young and the independent. In the 40s, it was the soldier. In the 80s and 90s, it was the rock star and the high-powered stockbroker. In her article hosted on Cyborgology titled The Introvert Fetish, Whitney Aaron Bozell argues that right here, right now, the type that we value the most is, you guessed it, the introvert, possibly to the point of fetishization. Source in the description, by the way, which is great. I mean, the signs are all there. The internet abounds with respect for the bookish loner, the locked-away programmer, and the creative toiler. There have been countless articles written about how awesome introverts are. But before we get too much further, let's talk about what it is that we're actually talking about when we talk about people who don't want to talk about themselves. The caricature of the introvert is pretty familiar. Quiet and reserved, smart, and not too interested in social interaction. They retreat from spectacle and, much like a unicorn, appear only briefly on the horizon before retreating to their mythical, book-lined, intellectually stimulating home, which is built inside of a library, which is itself built inside of CERN, underneath a mountain, also made of books. It's all rather beautifully summed up in this hilariously, irresponsibly reductive comic that illustrates how Tumblr specifically views introverts versus extroverts. The simple and more true difference is that while extroverts operate most comfortably in groups, talking and socializing, introverts find that stuff tiring or frustrating. In those situations, they expend energy, which they have to replenish with quality alone time or in small, specific groups, most likely in their particle accelerator library house. In its most common and practical institutionalization, the introvert is the I at the beginning of the Myers-Briggs test. You know, like ENSJ and INTP. The Myers-Briggs describes introverts as orienting more inwards towards ideas and knowledge than outwards towards people, objects, and interactions. For instance, the last time I took the Myers-Briggs, I tested INTP for introvert, intuitive, thinking, perceiving, but tested just barely as introverted. It's important to realize that intro and extroversion are not a binary, and also don't indicate whether someone is smart, a good programmer, or more likely to shout conga line and throw their arms into the air at a party while, oh, actually it probably does indicate that last one. But because the introvert is more happy reflecting and focusing doesn't mean that they're shy. And because the extrovert is happy being the center of attention doesn't mean that they hate books or deep conversation. The introvert celebrated on certain internets is simplified, or as Bozell says, meme caricatured, elevated to a kind of bookish genius, an enviable collector of thoughts and expertise. What's interesting though is that this introvert caricature, unfairly or not, could also stand in for a commonly held idea of what it means to be a nerd. There is a popular portrait, I think it's fair to say, of the nerd, and that portrait has recently reached, and maybe most recently jumped a shark over, a certain level of notoriety. Within the last couple years, it's become meaningful to self-identify as a nerd, and to nerd out about things that are not considered classically a part of the nerd canon. Whatever that is. In other words, you can be a beer nerd, a football nerd, or an engine nerd in the same way that you can be a history or economics nerd. Now, I'm not saying that you can't be a nerd for something that is not classically considered nerdy. You most certainly can. Being excited about things is neat. But nerddom has certainly made something of a leap, right? In my experience, when someone describes themselves as a nerd for something, they are indicating that they either have or want to spend a significant amount of time learning about that thing, involved in it, thinking about its concepts and deeper meanings, probably and most likely doing lots of reading and thinking about that thing. They want to communicate an authentic interest in it. The suggestion, I think, is that the self-professed train or photography or whatever nerd has foregone other activities in order to immerse themselves in the minutia of trains or whatever. Based upon our widely held cultural understanding of what the word nerd means, is it possible that those foregone activities are of a social nature? Big dramatic shrug with palms upturned? This does assert some status, doesn't it? To say that you would rather, and sometimes do, read a book about beer or cross-stitching or playing the electric guitar instead of going out with your pals to drink beer or cross-stitch or going to the open mic to play electric guitar, which now that I think about it actually sounds like a great trio of simultaneous activities. Now with this speculative relationship between self-proclaimed nerdiness and stereotypical introversion in hand, we might ask why someone would want to self-describe as a nerd anyway. Why not master or maven or meister? No, not that kind of meister. Or any of the dozens of other words we have to describe some lotto laudable level of expertise? Well, here we are again back at asserting status. It's because, ironically enough, nerds are cool and popular and in the limelight. They are changing the world by building the internet, pushing science forward, creating and starring in all of that media that we love, except for Big Bang Theory, and making our lives so much better with all of the apps and games that they know how to program. But while my hypothesis might be that introversion is cool because nerds are stereotypically introverts, and nerds also, stereotypically, have an enviable technological prowess, Boesel says otherwise. She says almost the opposite, actually. Remember in our original description of the introvert, there was that focus on ideas and concepts? Boesel positions these opposite technology, not alongside them, and in doing so evokes Nathan Jurgensen's digital dualism. Jurgensen's theory describes an imagined rift between online communication and meat space or real-life communication. There is a fair amount of discourse which privileges authentic real-life communication over inauthentic, mediated communication. Boesel says that introverts evoke a depth or authenticity normally associated with being offline. She writes that extroverts are denigrated digital interaction personified. Like your smartphone, they're always on. Like Facebook, they have too many friends, and those friendships aren't even real. Like SMS and Twitter, their interactions are too short and too superficial. Introverts, she writes, on the other hand, are meme caricatured as preferring quality over quantity, and gravitating more towards what is authentic and meaningful. Either way you look at it, though, we position the introvert caricature near technology, either as its powerful master or totally removed from it, disinterested in its pace and lack of authenticity, able to disconnect at will. The very nature of the introvert encourages a kind of reading into their temperament. Perhaps we read into this personality type the same way that we read into the communication technology itself. If we want to idealize it, maybe we also idealize the people we most closely associate with it. And if we want to decry it, samesies. The reality, though, is surely much more complex. There is no one type of introversion or one valuation for it. There is no one internet or one way to communicate using it. Though, to be perfectly honest, I think drawing a distinction between the internet and real life is really silly, though you probably already knew that. But no matter how you feel about the introvert phenomena, it's hard to not give at least a passing nod to the irony that introverts are finally getting their moment in the spotlight. What do you guys think? How is the introvert caricature that we are celebrating related to technology, if at all? Let us know in the comments, and there is now a 5th Myers-Briggs letter which indicates whether you are an Idea Channel subscriber or not. Let's see what you guys had to say about Night Vale and the unknown. And now, the comments. So this week we're gonna do something a little bit different with the comments. There were a bunch of themes of comments that I want to address all kind of in a row. So I'm just gonna talk for a second and we'll put all of the related comments below me while I kind of jabber for a little while. A bunch of people pointed out 2 things that we did not talk about. The first one was that Lovecraft was a notorious racist and that his relationship to the unknown probably came from his fear of things that he didn't know or understand, like other and different people. Relatedly, Joseph Fink, the creator of Night Vale, has said that he doesn't like Lovecraft or his writing for this very reason. And I think that this is really interesting. It's hard to be a horror writer in 2013 working with the unknown and not have some kind of relationship or conversation with Lovecraft's work. And I can totally get down with Joseph Fink not wanting to be related to Lovecraft's politics. And I can even get down with the fact that Lovecraft wasn't the greatest writer on planet Earth. Though Graham Harman, the philosopher that we quoted in the last episode, would disagree. He would say that he was a very accomplished stylist and wordsmith. But the thing that I think is really interesting is that he seems to be seeking in his NPR interview, which I hadn't heard before people linked to it, so thank you for linking that, is that he's seeking to sort of distance himself, which it reminds me of this, I think it's a John Cage quote that said that you are always, as a maker, you are always revolting against your father's art. And I think what better way to revolt against Lovecraft's work than to use it to normalize things that he would be so uncomfortable with. And I think that that makes the relationship even stronger and even more interesting. There are a couple readings of Night Vale that do exactly this. You can say that in a world where everything is strange, including the queer relationship between Carlos and Cecil, that nothing is strange and therefore everything is normal. You can radicalize it a little bit and even say that in a world full of all kinds of bizarre nonsense, the only thing that is celebrated is a queer relationship. And you can go one step further and say that we, like people in the world, in reading Night Vale, pay no mind to all of that crazy stuff, but we focus on the relationship between Cecil and Carlos, the very human and important thing that they have. Related to this is also the conversation surrounding Cecil's race, because it's never actually mentioned, so who knows? I think saying that the fact that Cecil is depicted largely as a blonde white guy is problematic is, I don't know if it's problematic, but it certainly, I think, says a lot about the Night Vale fandom and what they expect a leading man, or what they imagine Cecil based upon his voice or surroundings to look like. I think it's really exciting and awesome that there are so many depictions of Cecil where he is a person of color, but also very interesting that the majority one is that, like I said, the Tim Gunn looking guy. So. Relatedly, I think that the challenges to normality and, maybe more importantly, normal practices within fan cultures are really important and really interesting, and that this sort of provides a way for people to cosplay or celebrate not as a definitive depiction of something, but as a kind of signifier for a character, and I'm really excited to see whether or not that practice, coming from Night Vale, finds its way into other fandoms. I don't know. We'll see. All in all, very interesting, and thank you for all of your amazing comments. This week's episode was brought to you by the hard work of these faceless women living in your house, and instead of the tweet of the week, you should go and listen to Joseph Fink's interview on NPR. We'll put a link in the description.